The first matter of business, of course, we're going to start at the top of the tree, UFC 305, Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessiswhich. Now, coming into it, there was a big narrative. There was quite a lot of animosity, to be perfectly honest. But we knew stylistically it would be a fun fight. That's exactly what we got. This was an incredible fight. And what I think was even more impressive about this is Izzy hadn't lost a beat. He wasn't slow. He didn't look old. He didn't look weathered. He looked bang on form, which makes this win even more impressive for Dricus Du Plessis. And it's easy when you watch Dricus to see things that he does maybe incorrectly or unorthodox and then break down how someone could exploit that. But it's one thing saying it and it's another thing doing it. And yet again, we saw a very high level, one of the greatest middleweights of all time, not be able to capitalize on those mistakes. Now, don't get twisted. Israel did have success. He had a lot of success. His striking looked good from a distance. He done a good job in understanding where the defense was going to be from Dricus. He knew that he always had that high guard, so he used a lot of attacks down the middle. He used long-range jabs and straights to split the guard, uppercuts. Didn't use that many knees, I think probably because of the threat of the takedown. But he also done a great job at using that high guard to go to the body. And I think that's what was really impressive from Izzy. But it's almost like Dricus makes this trade-off to say, okay, I'm going to defend my head. I'm going to defend maybe the knockout shots, and I'm just going to take everything else to the armoured vehicle that is his torso. Because how he ate those body shots, I will not know. Because Israel has pinpoint accuracy, he has power, he has long levers, and he was ripping those shots. So I do think it was a good strategy from Israel to try and drain on the gas tank. But this is another thing. We know Dricus has good conditioning. We know that. But anyone can be worn down. And Izzy was obviously implementing that game plan to wear him down. But however tired that man gets, he pushes through. He fights through it. And the thing that I heard Luke Thomas say about Dricus, which I think is 100% on the money, is he has so many layers to his attack. So when you look at grapplers, you'll often talk about chain wrestling and how they chain together submissions or wrestling details, but you don't talk about it as much in the striking department. But what Dricus does a phenomenal job of is doing that with mixed martial arts. So maybe he has an unsuccessful takedown attempt in the open. There were a couple of those. Maybe he has some unsuccessful striking exchanges. But he doesn't let that deter him from his ultimate goal. He continually pushes forward. He continually goes to the next wrinkle, continually goes to the next level. And it's very overwhelming for anyone because you have to fight him at every discipline. You have to fight him in the striking, which he's now shown he's world class at because he hung with Izzy on the feet like he said he wanted to and like he proved. You have to hang with him in the wrestling, because he's relentlessly going to be showing different level changes. And you have to hang with him in the jiu-jitsu threat as well, because we've seen how dangerous his jiu-jitsu game can be. Not only outside of the UFC, in actual grappling contests and seeing what he's done in other promotions, but also now in the UFC. And you have a look at this man's resume, the likes of Darren Till, the likes of Brad Tavares, the likes of Robert Whittaker, finishing Robert Whittaker, knocking him out. The likes of Israel Adesanya, finishing him, submitting him. Decision with Sean Strickland. He's not only fighting the most elite guys, but he's finishing the most elite guys in spectacular fashion. And we have to really look at him and think, who poses a threat to him right now at 185 pounds? Because you have to bring certain elements to the table. You have to be able to strike. You have to have incredible conditioning. And you have to have a chin. Because this man carries power, not only in both hands, but he carries it for 5 rounds. And we've seen that now as well. So he really is becoming a conundrum. And like I said, we got Israel at his very best tonight. Make no mistake about it. He had not lost a beat. Had not lost a beat. Super impressed by Dricus Du Plessis. And it sort of begs the question, what's next for him? So let's have a look what's next for both of the men in the main event. And then we'll look at the rest of the card. I think for Dricus, they said they're going to go with that Sean Strickland fight, and I believe that they will. However, if we get that Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev fight and something spectacular happens, I would not be surprised if we saw some changes in that event. I wouldn't be surprised, especially Chimaev. If Chimaev goes out there and has an all-time performance against Robert Whittaker, Sean Strickland gets left behind, I believe. Now, should he? Probably not. Will he? Most certainly, in my opinion. I think if Chimaev goes out there and does the unthinkable, stopping Robert Whittaker, I think he gets the title shot next. I don't want to see Alex Pereira come down to middleweight. I know he's been flirting with that idea. He just put a post out on Instagram that said, I'm going to move back down to 185 pounds and fight Dricus. I don't like that. And I don't get why he would do that, to be honest, because the cut is clearly not easy. It definitely compromises his chin. And if he's going to move anywhere, it should be to heavyweight. Now, I do think he's got work left to do in a light heavyweight division, 100%. But I mean, in regards to a legacy and fights to build, it's definitely the wrong division to go into. A division that you've already done great work in, had phenomenal performances, and captured the belt. It doesn't make much sense. And what I find quite funny about Alex Pereira maybe calling out DDP, it's similar to the narrative with a lot of people calling Alex out at middleweight and light heavyweight. You watch him from afar and you think, okay, everyone's having problems, but I won't have problems. I can see this hole and this hole. I can do this. I can do this. Light work. Maybe not light work, easier work. I don't think that's the case at all. But why I find that ironic is because it feels like that's actually why Alex called out Dricus. But he has that Khalil Roundtree fight coming up. And then realistically, he should fight Ankalaev. And then we can look at heavyweight. If we're talking meritocracy, if we're talking crazy legacy, Khalil Roundtree, then heavyweight. Let's go Sizzler. And the UFC are likely going to need an undisputed champion in heavyweight because I believe there'll be a double retirement in November. But where does that leave Israel? Whether he stays at 185 or 205, I'm not too sure. Because if he does go to 205 and gets one big win, realistically, he's right in the title picture. That's just the nature of the beast when you're someone that has the superstar status like Israel does. Now, there's one name that is just screaming out to me, Yuri Prochazka. Yuri Prochazka at 185, Yuri Prochazka at 205, I think makes all the sense in the world. Stylistically, a fantastic matchup. Fantastic matchup. Both men have very, I was going to say funky styles. Israel's a lot more conventional. Of course, Yuri is a lot more unconventional. But when it comes to the striking, they use similar techniques in regards to their kicking and the straight shots. They sometimes throw their punches from different angles. But I think that would stay standing. It would be a kickboxing match in 4-ounce gloves. And it gives both men the opportunity to go out there against a massive name in the sport and put on a crazy performance and reinsert themselves in the title picture. Because Yuri's been very vocal about wanting that Alex Pereira rematch. Nothing does that for you more than beating Israel Adesanya. That's what I think should be next for both guys. Let's have a little scroll up with some questions. So we've done the main event. We're going to have to talk on the co-main. We're going to have to talk on the co-main event. Because make no mistake about it, that's a flipping impressive win from Kai Kara France. There's not too many ways you can look at that other than that was impressive. The fact that this man fights at 125 pounds and has 13 first round KOs is insanity and very marketable. And it just brings a different element to that flyweight division because when you look at it, when Deiveson Figueiredo left, you start looking around that top 5, the top 10, and although there's an exceptional amount of skill level on display, there isn't someone with that knockout ability, that knockout power. But that's exactly what Kai Kara France brings to the table. Now, coming into this fight, I did think if he just continually looks to throw that right hand and just spam that. I think Urseg's going to be too calculated and be able to just avoid it. I think he's going to be able to cut angles defensively and get out of the way of that. But they made a really nice adjustment in the tape study because they saw that he backed up in a straight line. Kai Kara-France picked up on that as well in the fight. And then he threw the right hand as a decoy, stepped through to the southpaw, shifted through on his stance, and then landed that left hand. And that was essentially the beginning of the end. And it was a beautiful knockdown. Very reminiscent of Darren Till and Jorge Masvidal. And you look at Kai Kara-France now with that type of performance, you have to put him in the title conversation. You just have to. The way that flyweight is at the moment, it's a little bit all over the place. Of course, Mohammed Makayev's left. We've got Amir Al-Bazi coming off a couple of nasty surgeries, heart and neck, after coming off an impressive win against Kai Kara-France. But it's a what have you done for me lately industry. Now, he has lost to the current champion, so there's a lot of logistics at play there. I do think there's still an outside chance that we see Kai Asakura come in and fight for the title. I think if history tells us anything, they were more than happy to do that with Steve Urseg after just a couple of fights. And I think they'll do something similar. So it wouldn't surprise me if they ran that fight. But Kai Kara-France is right there. He's right there and he's a danger to everyone and anyone. And you look at that Pantoja matchup, and every fight that Pantoja gets in is a war. And you know that the time is ticking on his career, especially at flyweight with his age. So every day that passes, that matchup gets more and more dangerous for him. And now Kai Kara-France is going to have a tremendous amount of confidence, and so he should. And Steve Urseg did coming into this fight, and so he should. Because he is very good, but he did back up in that straight line, did make that defensive lapse. And honestly, you have to bring up the point, how much did that last fight affect him? Because you have to factor that into this. He fought in, when was it? May? A 5-round war against Pantoja. It's a quick turnaround. Quick turnaround. I'm not saying he wouldn't have got dropped from those shots if he didn't have that fight. But it has to be a consideration. Has to be a consideration. Which leads us on to a big fight in the lightweight division. A big fight. And I said to everyone when I was breaking down Dan Hooker and Mateusz Gamrot, the narrative, of course, is going to be that wrestling. Dan Hooker's got the highest takedown defense in lightweight history. Not an easy man to take down. And Gamrot did get him down there a couple of times. But one of them, he actually dropped him. And that single leg's just a bastard. Mateusz Gamrot is a gamer. It's the most perfectly apt name for that man. And it was a close fight. Let's make no mistake. I did think that Dan Hooker was going to edge it. I did think. And he did. And it was a super impressive win. And now Dan Hooker's not far away from the title shot. Because you go out against Gamrot, who, by the way, has had an absolute nightmare of a time. Because he's weighed in as the backup for the title fight in Abu Dhabi. And then ever since then, he's just had to fight the hardest matchups in the division. You look at the Rafael Fitz-Eve fight, although that obviously went to an injury, but his striking was looking much more improved there. And it looked much more improved in his Dan Hooker fight. He had a lot of success. He had a couple of nice moments with the shovel uppercut, I remember. And whilst it wasn't as clean or as technical as Dan Hooker, certainly as effective. But there was almost a turning point in the fight where Dan said, you know what? I need to put him on his back foot. I need to wear him down. And I need to just melt him with pressure. And if anyone's going to do that to you in the lightweight division, it's Dan Hooker. It's Dan Hooker or it's Dustin Poirier. And guess what? That tees up a potential rematch. Because Dustin Poirier said that he wants one more. Dan Hooker's not a bad dance partner. Not a bad dance partner whatsoever. He did get on the mic and he said everything's on the table. I want the BMF belt. That's not the craziest suggestion. Dan Hooker, Max Holloway, BMF belt. Not a bad fight. This is the thing with Dan, is because of his last couple of injuries, broken arms, and he's been out of the picture for a little bit, we've sort of forgotten his name in these conversations, but now he's just reinserted himself back in there with everything. He's got a big new contract, probably the highest paid lightweight out of Conor and Dustin, I would say. And now everything's on the table. We've got Justin Gaethje on the table. We've got Dustin Poirier. We've got BMF belt with Max Holloway. Conor McGregor, he chucked on the mic. And I know a lot of people call out McGregor, but there's some people who actually hold weight when they ask for that. And Dan Hooker holds weight because he's a veteran. He's a legend in the lightweight division. He's fought everyone. He's always in exciting fights. And he's a fantastic stylistic matchup for him. So the UFC may look at that and think, don't mind that. Don't mind that at all. And the last one they didn't mention, but is a fun fight, Charles Oliveira. Everything's on the table for Dan Hooker right now. And like he said on the mic, it was a close fight, but a win's a win. I got my arm raised 100%. 100%. People aren't going to remember it being too close or narrow rounds. They're just going to see W in the last 3 fights of Dan Hooker, and they're going to see some good names. They're going to see Jalen Turner, and they're going to see Mateusz Gamrot in the last 2. Not bad. Not bad at all. And a fun fact, Mateusz Gamrot and Dan Hooker were the only fight on the card that were actually both coming off wins. So not only did he beat Gamrot, he beat him coming off momentum, which is even harder. And a lot of people were saying it was stylistically the toughest matchup for him. I would have loved to have seen it go 5. And to be honest, I think if it goes 5, I think Dan Hooker gets the stoppage. Because he was starting to put a pace on Gamrot that he was not comfortable with. And whenever you're facing a relentless wrestler, or any wrestler for that matter, the only place they don't want to be going is backwards. That's not where they want to be. And although Gamrot's striking has definitely improved, striking moving backwards for the entire time, counter-striking and the energy that requires, that's not where he wants to be. And that's not where he wants to shoot with. And when Dan Hooker's got him up against the cage as a more stationary target, and he's letting those teeps and stabbing front kicks go, and he's letting those long levers go, he's a problem. And I did say coming into this, some of the best weapons of Dan Hooker are his front kicks, his teeps, his knees, and his guillotine. Coincidentally, 3 perfect attacks to discourage someone like Gamrot. So even though this fight was close, the fact that he was such a drastic underdog coming off 2 wins, it did surprise me. To be perfectly honest, it did surprise me. But let me answer some of your questions. What is next for Gamrot? That's a good question. So Dan Hooker, we've got everything on the table. For Gamrot, I'd like to see a Benoit Saint-Denis. Benoit Saint-Denis, Mateusz Gamrot, off the top of my head, is a fantastic fight to make. A fantastic fight to make. You've got the offensive wrestling that we know Gamrot brings to the table. And then you've got the very slick jiu-jitsu of Benoit Saint-Denis. Both men are absolute gamers on the feet. Maybe not the most refined striking, but definitely effective on both sides. I'd probably give the edge to Benoit Saint-Denis just in regards to the polished Muay Thai. But I think it's quite competitive on the feet, to be honest. Both men are happy to take a shot to walk forward. Both men are very exciting. And both men can grapple all day long. I think that's the fight to make next. And I think where you have Gamrot coming off that loss, and you have Benoit Saint-Denis coming off his loss, that's usually what the UFC like to do. And I think Gamrot needs a big name win. And that's what BSD brings to the table now after fighting Dustin Poirier, after having an entire backing of France. And I think that's the fight you make. I do think Gamrot's going to need a little time off because he did take some damage. And that was not an easy fight pace to fight at. Not an easy pace to fight at all. But that's what he brings to the table. What's my job? This is my job, my friend. Casual's corner is my job. Carlos France had the best performance. Hard to argue with that. It really is hard to argue with that. What do I think about the judge getting replaced? That's a good question. Because the scorecard in the Taito Avasa Jairzinho Rosenstruck fight was arguably the worst scorecard in UFC history. I don't know if that's even a hot take. Is that recency bias? Potentially not. 30-27 was the most obscene scorecard I've ever seen. Ever. It was ridiculous. Now, I'll preface this by saying I often give the benefit of the doubt to judges, because watching a fight from home on a TV screen with commentary is tremendously different from sitting cage side and having to score in live speed. Bearing in mind that each judge sits at a different point of the cage, so they're getting different perspectives. Watching cage side is a completely different fight. And if you've never sat cage side and watched a fight and then watched it back on a screen, you wouldn't quite realise the difference, but it can be vast. There was no excuse for this. No angle gives you 30-27 for Taito Avasa. And I think the glaring issue that this comes back to is not just on judging, because overnight judging is not going to improve vastly. That just isn't going to happen. So you're not going to have these macro developments in judging. So you're going to have to make some more strategic changes. So what can that be? The most obvious change that you can make in judging is put the judges in a quiet room in the arena, not in the arena, doesn't really matter, with screens. Simple as that. No commentary, no arena noise, with screens. The fact that judges are watching cage side is ridiculous. Simply ridiculous. And the more I watch MMA fights cage side, the more I think it's crazy they still do this. I don't know how they haven't made this change. The cost is probably zero. Maybe a couple of earmuffs and a couple of screens. I'll even donate them, get them off Facebook Marketplace. And I don't think that's going to perfect judging, but I guarantee there is more consistency and we see less scorecards like this. It's not going to make it perfect, but I guarantee the improvements will be exponential. So I do think it was drastic, that scorecard. And I also commend the commission for just pulling them straight away, because that's what you like to see, especially with judges that don't rotate. Let's just get rid of them. They do it sometimes with refs. I've seen it happen once or twice with refs, but it doesn't happen very often with judges. So fair play to them for actually actioning that. Appreciate it, Matt. I have been up all night, that is true. So a lot of people are saying about the Israel finish, and a lot of you guys are saying it looks like it just fell apart. In all honesty, in live speed, it did look like that. It did look like that. But when you watch it back and you watch the finishing sequence, I believe it's a left hand from Dricus as Izzy's just circling away from him against the cage, and it just clips the top of the head. And that's the equilibrium. You hear the commentators say so many times. That's where your equilibrium comes. So let's bear in mind that it's an extremely high-paced fight. He's taken some big shots at this point anyway, and then potentially just loses his equilibrium. It's then going to be hard to make the adjustments in the grappling with lightning speed if that's not your real domain. Now, if he was clear-headed and it was the first round, do I think he gets submitted there? Probably not, to be honest. Probably not. But I think the pace that Dricus fought at, or they both fought at, or at least Dricus pushed, the damage within the last sequence and potentially the loss of equilibrium, I think contributed to the fact that he lagged a second or two in the grappling. And if you do lag a second or two in the grappling against someone like Dricus, he's going to take advantage of it, because he does have a very good system with his grappling, and he spoke about that, how he didn't even need to go to the second layer. And that goes back to what I was speaking about before. Not only does he layer his attacks in MMA, but he has that in the different areas of MMA. I did a breakdown this week of his jiu-jitsu. Has phenomenal front head choke series, guillotines and darces, and he's so strong there that when you are a little bit gassed and you have full 15, 20 minutes at a very high pace, and you get one of those flipping great big biceps around your throat, didn't surprise me. Didn't surprise me. And that's where Dricus has that advantage over a lot of guys there. He can lean on that offensive grappling. I think most of Israel's career has been a case of mitigating the wrestling and the jiu-jitsu, of which he is phenomenal at, by the way, and still done a phenomenal job today until we didn't. But he never had the ability to lean on it offensively. We never got to saw that. We never got to see that in his career. And I think that's really the difference. And I think when you're a champion for a very long time, or you fight at the highest level, especially as the game evolves, just by a numbers game, you're going to need more paths to victory. So if it's constantly being left to just your striking, and people have an absolute catalogue of your striking, an archive of hours to watch, look for patterns, look for deficiencies, it's going to be hard to show up and show out with just that every single time. Now, don't get it twisted, he is elite and he can beat anyone in the striking, but to do that every single time is going to be very difficult, and it showed it here. A lot of people as well were saying that they thought Dricus Du Plessis looked gassed. Yeah. You will be fighting at that pace. It doesn't really matter how good a shape you're in. If you are grappling, striking, and absorbing damage in a title fight over 25 minutes, you're going to get tired. Israel has some of the best conditioning ever, to be honest. You see him go deep into 5 rounds. How many times? Nasal breathing. He was breathing heavy. He was tired. Because if you just fight at an all-out pace, it has to happen. There's no reservation gas. It doesn't matter how well conditioned you are. You will get tired. But the difference with Dricus and what makes him so special is the fact that he fights through that. And that's really one of the traits that just stands out head and shoulders above most. He can take it to that red line and just operate there. And it's almost as if he knows, okay, I'm tired, but I know they're tired. And I'm going to be able to push this pace more. And you have to think, because he's more comfortable in the grappling and because he's more comfortable in the jiu-jitsu, that's going to take less energy away from him as well. So in those exchanges, even though he's being offensive, even though it's costing a lot of energy, he's still more comfortable in those disciplines because he's spent so many years in there. So it's not going to be quite as taxing as it probably would be for Israel in those defensive areas when they hit the mat. Despite the fact he's very good there, I would imagine it's still going to be more taxing for Izzy. That's what's so special about Dricus Du Plessis. He can redline it and then just keep it at redline. And it's very, very difficult to do. Very difficult to do, but that's what makes him so special. Dustin versus Max would be better for the BMF. I think that's a fun fight to make as well, and I think that's on the table. The only I was going to say the only difficulty is to put Dustin in a title fight, but I guess the BMF comes with its own set of criteria. And I think the fact that he's got a win over Max, and it is the BMF, and no one's going to dispute Dustin in that title, I think that would make sense. Now, we do have to wait for the Ilia Topuria-Max Holloway fight to play out, because that's going to depend on a lot of things. A lot of things. And a lot of different opponents. This sport changes very quickly. BSD's already booked. Who's BSD booked against? Can't remember. It's hard to do this off the top of your head. Money Moicano, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, you're right. Okay, let me change that around. I think Gamrot's... I don't know. Who else is sitting in it? Okay, I think I've got it. Okay, I've got it. I've got it. Benoit Saint Denis is booked against Manny Moicano. Completely forgot that. Very easily done because there are so many fights. So here we go. This is where we go with Gamrot next. Jalen Turner. Mateusz Gamrot. No, we've already seen that. Fuck. We've already seen that. Where do we go next? Do we want to run the Fitzev one back? Maybe. To be honest. Maybe. God, it's a tough one. What do you do with Gamrot next? Fizzy. That could be it. That could be it, to be honest. We've seen the Dan Hooker fight. We've seen the Jalen Turner fight. He's fought a lot of people. Let's just put that out there. Maybe a Justin Gaethje. Ooh, maybe a Justin Gaethje. But that's quite high in the rankings. But he is coming off a knockout loss. This is difficult. It's difficult what you do with Gamrot next because he's fought a lot of those guys. Maybe it does make sense to run back the Rafael Fitzev fight, to be honest. That fight did end with injury, and Gamrot was having success on the feet. I don't think a lot of people thought that fight would play out like that, but he was having good success. Fitzev has shown to have incredible takedown defense, so I think that one stays standing. I think both men, in some regards, won't be satisfied for that win. And I think it's just quite an easy matchup. You've got quite a lot of people booked already in and around those rankings. And you have quite a lot of people that they've already fought in and around those rankings. So maybe we just run back Mateusz Gamrot and Rafael Fitzev. I think both men are now coming off a loss. Of course, we have the prior history. We had the injury in that fight. And it was a good matchup for as long as it lasted. So why don't we just play that one back and get a conclusive answer? Quite like the sound of it the more I think of it. I think Mateusz Gamrot versus Rafael Fitzev is probably the fight to make right there. I like that. I like that a lot. You can't really do too much with Max Holloway at the moment. A lot of people are suggesting Max Holloway, but you can't do too much with him because he's booked with Ilya. So we can't really talk about lightweight. We can't really talk about next fights because you need to see how that one plays out to see what he does next. Does he stay at featherweight? Does he move up to lightweight? Does he go BMF? A lot of options, and depending on how he wins or loses. Do I think Khamzat Chimaev can become champion? Yes. I've always thought that he can. I still think that he can. I just think there's slight changes that need to be made in his preparation to fight first and foremost, and then his approach in the fight. I think in regards to his preparation, it's seemingly quite clear that he overtrains, and it coincides exactly with when he gets ill in his camps. Because always the time that he gets ill when he starts to pull out is always around the time that a professional fighter will look to be peaking their training. And he's always someone that's been spoken about as training like a madman. So if we're a couple of weeks out, a few weeks out, and that's when the training is really ramping up, or a few weeks out, and the training is really getting to that intense phase, it's not good for the immune system. It's not good for the body. It's no surprise that he's getting ill, he's getting injuries. It happens with anyone, but clearly it's happened with him a lot. And I do think overtraining is down to that. So I think that's one area that he has to address. And then I also think he has to address an output issue. I don't think he has bad cardio at all. But sometimes just, I would say bad decision making. But then again, when we've seen him go balls to the wall early rounds, we've seen him get finishes. I just think that's not always going to be the best strategy when you fight the very, very elite. You come out against the likes of Robert Whittaker and you go balls to the wall and try and finish him in one. It's going to be very difficult to do. So I do think he has the skills to beat Whittaker. I do think he has the skills. And when you watch the trouble that Whittaker's had, he's not got a lot of holes in his game. He really doesn't. But the only trouble he's had on a few occasions is people in that southpaw stance. And although Chimaev isn't a natural southpaw and he doesn't stay there for a long period of time. We've seen him have success out of there and we do see him switch stances. We saw against Gilbert Burns, dropped him with that jab out of southpaw. And I think that's going to be a weapon which is going to be on display if they do their homework, and I think they naturally will because they come from a very good team. Who do I think Justin Gaethje should fight next? I really like the Justin Gaethje-Dan Hooker fight. I know that Justin Gaethje is coming off a loss. So does that fight make as much sense? I think sometimes you can bypass protocol. I think Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker makes too much sense not to book right now. And it's within the UFC's best interest to have Gaethje around that title picture because he's such a big star, because he's so fan-friendly, because he's American, and that's where their biggest pay-per-view audience is. And I also think they just know it's a fantastic matchup with Dan Hooker, and it's a fight that we haven't had, but it feels like we've had 10 times. It's one of those weird ones. We've seen Justin fight almost everyone around that top 5, top 10 in the lightweight division, but Dan Hooker we haven't seen yet. And I think when you look at the styles of both guys, it's one of those fights that you can put money on and just say, yeah, 100%, that's going to be fun. And I think it gets both men in the title conversation with the right win. And it's fresh matchups as well. Fresh matchups, big names, big events, big style fight. Don't think that's a bad one. There's so many options now for Dan Hooker, because you asked there about Charles Oliveira. I think Charles Oliveira is a great fight. He's coming off a loss, which is not always what the UFC love doing, but there's no one in the top 5 coming off a win that I can think of. So Dan Hooker is likely going to be fighting a Charles Oliveira, a Justin Gaethje. And I think they're all fun. And to be honest, I think the fans buy into any of it. Absolutely any of it. Do I think Sean O'Malley could become a double champion? 100%. 100%. I think when you ask the question, can someone become a double champion? I think you have to ask yourself a few questions. Number 1, their frame. Do they have a frame where they would benefit from putting on a little bit of size? Nothing crazy, because you don't want to limit what's his strength, which is his speed. But Sean 100% does. He's very big for bantamweight in regards to just his length and his frame. So there's definitely scope for that. And he's just coming into his athletic prime now. He's not even hit 30, which is where you'll start looking to see people come into their prime. So there's definitely still a little bit of room for growth. Then we have a look at his style. Does he have a style conducive to going up and winning? 100%. He doesn't look to just get into wars, wade forward and take shots to give one. He's very cerebral. And I think he would have a dramatic speed advantage going up to featherweight with most guys. In fact, all guys, I think he'd have a speed advantage for. And he's a very difficult striker. He's hard to take down. He's got underrated jiu-jitsu, very funky jiu-jitsu. And I think he's a problem for a lot of people. I do think he has to go out there and flatline Merab. And I think he likely has to go out there and flatline Umar. Of which I believe he's capable of both. Not only does he have the skill for it, but Sean O'Malley's a big time player. When the lights are the brightest and when the pressure is the highest, that's when Sean O'Malley shines, and that's what makes him special. That's what makes him a very special athlete. Very special athlete. So yeah, I do think he can go up and be a double champion. Yes, you, Kev. We had a phenomenally impressive performance that we've not even spoke about yet, that we have to touch on, that you just inspired me for. Prates. This guy. The leech has never been finished. Never been knocked out. And this performance was arguably one of the most impressive. When you look at what he done and how he done it, and the step up in competition that he had, there's an argument to be made that Carlos Prates had the most impressive performance on UFC 305. There's an argument to be made. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you that's fact, but there's an argument to be made. Because stepping up to someone like Li Jingliang, who is an absolute veteran, we know him to be a black belt, so he's got tricky ground game. I did say coming into this, I don't think that he has the offensive grappling to get that there. And also, Carlos Prates is not an easy guy to take down because of his length and because of how well he uses his weapons and his footwork. Not easy to do. So it's an easy narrative to set up, take him down, submit him. Not that easy to do in real life. And then when you factor in that Li Jingliang has never been finished and Carlos Prates is just sitting him down at will, incredibly impressive. And the sky really is the limit for this man, because you often see taller men in divisions and they don't use their attributes to their advantage. They may have a height and reach advantage, and especially from southpaw, he does everything you'd want someone to do with those attributes. He uses his range, he uses his length, he uses the front kicks down the middle. From the southpaw stance, he uses the backhand as an absolute piston, and he throws it from a very low angle, so it's very hard to pick up on. And it's also there for down blocks as well if you do go to take him down. And if you are level changing, you're level changing onto a lot of feints and a lot of fakes of different levels of knees, of uppercuts. And it's a dangerous game to play. So not only did he sit him down multiple times, it was the composure. That's what impressed me, because it's very easy to be a knockout artist and to have multiple knockouts in the organization already, to put together some momentum, to be on a big stage, to get a knockdown, and then to get excited and rush the finish. Absolutely not. He looked as chilled as that video of him smoking a cigarette and getting his 50k performance of the night bonus the last time he fought. He was cool, calm, collected. Let him stand back up. Did not flinch and just knew this guy is not on my level on the feet. And that's kind of what I expected coming into this fight. Now, did I expect him to be as flawless as that? There was a part of me, but doing it on a big stage like that is another level. So super, super impressive, Carlos Prates. And now we really start having fun conversations with him, because again, we drop another absolute shark into the welterweight division. And someone said, I'd like to see him against a very good wrestler. My question to you is, find me an out-and-out wrestler in the welterweight top 15 that he's likely going to be fighting next. And I was looking up the rankings. You've got Joaquin Buckley, who can wrestle. I wouldn't say he's an out-and-out wrestler, but he's booked up with Wonderboy Thompson. And then the next guy after that, that isn't a striker, really, is Sean Brady. And that's at number 8. So I don't know whether we're going to see him tested in that grappling realm for quite a long time, because this division is not conducive to the wrestling. And then you look at the likes of Shavkat, you look at the likes of JDM, Ian Gary, Michael Morales in the picture. Welterweight is becoming a real sleeper division, and we're getting some real fun in the welterweight division. Real fun. And talking about real fun, I cannot speak about the impressive performance of Carlos Prates without mentioning the boy Jack Jenkins, because yet again he just impresses. And I absolutely love watching Jack Jenkins. He really has a style which to me is what I call fan friendly. Very fun to watch Muay Thai. Of course, the narrative we know with his low kicks are devastating. He's snapped 900 tibias at this point and probably got another one. If Herbert Burns comes out of this weekend without some sort of fractured bone in his leg, I would be shocked. But it wasn't just the Muay Thai this time. It was the boxing that impressed me with Jack Jenkins. That's what really impressed me, because he's getting to that level now where everyone knows that's facing him, we have to be scared of that low kick. So there's so many people conscious of the calf kick, it's allowing him to set up his hands more, and he knows that. So he actually went quite a long time without even throwing one and just using it as the trump card when he needed it, but letting it set up his hands. And then he started using his boxing, and the uppercut, absolutely loved that. The combinations in the pocket he was throwing were beautiful, and the body work was even better. And he spoke about how he landed the hardest body shot a man could land on someone, and how Burns didn't go down, I will not know. But super impressed with Jack Jenkins. And that is someone that you can throw in there with anyone and have a fun fight. He is always must-watch TV. And it really goes to show what Australia are doing on a global stage in mixed martial arts. There's so much talent coming out from there. And I think when you have guys from Australia, the striking's always going to be high level, because you have so much Muay Thai work out there, because it's one of the countries in the closest proximity. You get a lot of guys out there, and vice versa. That's usually quite a holiday destination as well, so it works both ways. So you're getting really good striking, and then you're getting the combat and sort of wrestling background from the rugby and the Aussie rules, and then you're just getting the flipping hard-headed nature of the Aussies as well, and they're really making a name for themselves on a global stage. So I'm really happy that Jack Jenkins got a big win. Big fan of Jack Jenkins. T-Ball Paul, what is happening, my friend? Appreciate the kind words, sir. Appreciate the kind words. I'm just going off here. Basil Havez, again, another fun one. There's a lot of talent at welterweight. There really is. Michael Morales is really one that I think people need to keep an eye out for. Again, it's the composure. It's the composure. And it's the ability to hurt his opponents with his boxing from range and to just not rush his work. I think someone who did get a good win, who is guilty of that, gonna have to give a little bit of a constructive criticism, is Tom Nolan. Now, we did get a win. Now, if you look at the odds, that should have happened. I believe he was the biggest betting underdog on the card and one of the biggest betting underdogs ever, which I just thought was a little bit insane, because yes, he is good and he does have a lot of skills, but he is green. He is green. And because he's good in the striking, when he does get his opponents hurt, he does sometimes rush and spoil his work, which I get. Don't get me wrong. I would be like a dog to a bone as well. But I think that's definitely somewhere he can improve. He spoke about it in the pre-fight build-up. It'll be interesting to see if he does that with his next fight. But again, exciting fighter coming out of Australia. A lot of talents. A lot of talent. Okay, right. Last couple. And we're going to wrap this one up. Getting a bit of a sore throat, to be honest. Bit of a weird one for me, because watch the prelims. I had quite a long day. I ended up getting a last-minute call-up, Volkanovski style, to go and film a food vlog with Paddy in London. So I ended up working in the morning, working all afternoon in London and the evening, and then coming straight back and getting into the prelims, and I was tired. I was thinking, I'm not going to survive this. I watched Jack Jenkins, and then I was going to set an alarm for the main card, just skip a couple of the prelims to get some sleep. Usually I can power through, but I couldn't. I didn't set an alarm, and I just magically woke up, and it was 2:55. My body knew. My body knew that I needed to watch Carlos Prates. It knew that. Okay. Right, last couple. Any burning desires in regards to questions, hit me. I did an extensive breakdown on Kai France and Urseg, so I can't go back into that, I'm afraid. Extensive. But put it this way, I'll break it down into one line for you. Very flipping impressive. And that is what Kai France needed, because he was out for a very long time, to be honest. And he was probably a little bit sour in that time off, because it was a very close fight with Amir Al-Bazi that people thought he won. So it would have been a tough one to sit on for that long period off. How did I know DDP would win? I was leaning towards Izzy by maybe... To be honest, I wasn't really leaning anywhere. I had them as a pick'em. I had them as a pick'em. And to be honest, watching the fight, I think that was a fair assessment. I really do. I really, really do think that was a fair assessment. I didn't take anything off the table here. I thought Dricus could win by knockout. I thought he could win by submission, decision. I think if Izzy were going to win, it was going to be by stoppage or a decision. But everything was on the table in this fight, to be honest. So I did a breakdown of Dricus submitting 5 guys in a row this week, and I know they're not the level of competition and it wasn't MMA, but my point is the man can fight everywhere. He's got a phenomenal gas tank, a phenomenal will to win, and he's got that confidence. The classic cliche that Teddy Atlas says, you get 30% better. Well, you watch this man, just how he holds himself. He's always held himself like a champion. But there's one thing holding yourself like a champion, and there's another thing holding the gold belt, becoming a champion. And as soon as he took that gold strap, there's just no one that I'm going to give him as a large underdog for. There's just no one at 185 and 205. And that's a conversation that not a lot of people are having, but that's a very real one. I think it's not crazy to suggest that on his day, Dricus Du Plessis can beat anyone at 185 and 205. Especially when you factor in that he can take it everywhere. Everywhere. And you look at 205, not a lot of wrestlers there. Not a lot of wrestlers there. And you know what? There's a narrative going around, and I need to address this, about Ankalaev. And yeah, he probably did deserve the title shot. But why is Ankalaev made out to be this wrestling machine? I've never seen that to be the case. Ever. Ever. Never seen it. Never had a professional submission. And has never really implemented a heavy grappling approach on high-level opponents that they haven't been able to mitigate to a large extent. So I don't know why he's always been made... Well, I do know why. It's because he's called Ankalaev. He's from Dagestan. He's got a Russian flag next to his location that he resides from. So I understand why. And I'm not saying that he can't win. And he does have good ground and pound, for sure. It's a good point to bring up. He does have good ground and pound. But I've never seen enough of a wrestling offense to suggest that that's a lights-out answer to everyone he comes up against. Now, it's a potential wrinkle to take into consideration, sure. I'm not discounting that. But if we think of a matchup between Dricus Du Plessis and Ankalaev, I don't see a world in where Ankalaev is taking down and mauling Dricus Du Plessis. I don't see that. And what people need to know is when they done the DEXA scans and they done all the results in the UFC PI, all of Dricus Du Plessis' results were higher than Yuri Prochazka. And that's not throwing shade on him. That's just showing you that Yuri's not the biggest light heavyweight. And we've seen how successful he can be. So I think there's everything to suggest that Dricus could do the same. Because you watch Yuri, and it's a good example, because you watch Yuri and you look at his defensive liabilities and you think, you can get caught up there. You can get caught up there. And he did eventually, but he also had a lot of success. But the difference with Yuri and Dricus is Dricus is more than happy to mix it up. More than happy to mix it up. And I actually think 205 could be possibly some better matchups for him in there. Not easy matchups. Not easy matchups. But then saying that, you look at 185 and who can really challenge in that grappling? Obviously, that Sean Strickland rematch is there. That was a close fight. I would quite like to see that one again at some point. I would like to see that because Sean done a great job of mitigating the wrestling and keeping it standing. And he's just as unorthodox and his defense is incredible. So Sean is really that guy there. But there's some outsiders. I think Fluffy Hernandez is a rogue one, but he's an outsider that not many people are speaking about. Because if you want to talk about conditioning, if you want to talk about good level of striking, good level of jiu-jitsu, Anthony Hernandez ticks all those boxes. And I know he's not in the immediate title picture, but I'm just thinking a little bit outside of that at the moment. Because I look at Nasruddin Imavov. He can be a problem for sure. He can be a problem. I just think Dricus is going to have a little bit too much horsepower. Just a bit too much horsepower. And then I think of Khamzat Chimaev. I don't think that's a good matchup for Khamzat Chimaev at all. At all. Does he implement a heavy wrestling game? I don't think so. Does he implement a heavy striking game? Possibly. But Dricus is going to have the power there. The power advantage for sure. And we know for a fact he's going to have the conditioning advantage. Difficult one. Really difficult one. Okay, anyway, I'm going to wrap that up. It's been about an hour. I've got a sore throat from chatting for a very long period of time. I've not really slept, and I've got a lot of work to do for the rest of the day. We've got a good interview with one of the best strength and conditioning coaches about at the moment, called Adam Lusby. Does work with Paul Craig, Chris Duncan, a lot of the guys in Scotland. Makes some really, really good content as well. Strength Performance Coach is his name on Instagram and TikTok. I'm going to be having a chat with him today. Going to be discussing with Leo the breakdown of the card as always. And then I'm going to be doing the interview on that. And then I'm going to be chopping this all up. So, yeah, hope you all enjoyed the card. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the engagement as always. I have just added onto my account, if anyone's interested, I have just added a new section where you can become a member. And I give a ton of different benefits away to that. So it goes bronze, silver, gold. You get different levels of access. You get different levels of giveaways. So a lot of the giveaways giving away comics, different pieces of t-shirts like this, giving away posters, photos that I've taken. Ton of different behind the scenes and whatnot. So if you want to support the channel, if you just want to support on a basic level, you're still given access to that as well. You can do request videos. So if you want certain breakdowns, if you want me to cover certain fights, certain topics, I'm taking those as well. So if you'll be interested in that at all, then you can go the link in my bio, and it's all through Buy Me a Coffee. If you've heard of that, it's just called Buy Me a Coffee, and you'll see in my shop that I offer quite a lot of different things now. I've started actually offering out my services on an actual freelance basis. I've been doing it for quite a long time, but haven't been putting it out to the public. I get a lot of questions about growing a brand and running an MMA media page and how to make it my full-time job and so many of these different things. So not only did I make it a very in-depth course, which took a long time and will save anyone a lot of idiot tax, but also then do freelance calls now as well, because I have been doing these things behind the scenes, but I haven't been putting it out there for people to go and buy. So if you want to support and get different levels of service, get different giveaways, get different pieces of merchandise, posters, that sort of thing, then you can go on that and become a member. If you want to simply get anything else in regard to information, then you know where to find it in the shop. So you can find it in the link in my bio on my TikTok at Buy Me a Coffee. So I think that pretty much wraps us up for today. Thank you all for tuning in. Very much appreciate the support, all the kind words. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Laura, for the follow. Thank you, Kev, for the engagement as always. And like I said, if you want to become a member, if you want any of the posters, comics, anything like that, request the videos, you can find it all, link in my bio. And until next time, people, keep it casual.